Hello and welcome to the Strong, Healthy, Happy podcast. You know it's Debra by now. I'm really pleased to be here as always. And today is part 3 of my 3-part mini series all about how to eat more and lose weight. If I sound a bit distracted, those of you who have been following me for a while, you will know that my dog has his bed at the side of my desk, and he has taken this moment as I've just started recording my podcast to come and jump up at me and want some attention. So I'm fully focused now. He's gone back to his bed, and I want to just talk about, first of all, welcome you to part 3. And just to say, if you've only just joined me at part 3, but not listened to part 1 and 2, please, I really recommend you go back and listen to those previous parts of this 3-part mini series, because I start with the planning, setting yourself up, setting up your environment. And then in part 2, I go on to talk about macronutrients, food types, food quality, food volume, how to reduce your calorie intake. And then now today in part 3, I'm going to be talking more about the way that you're eating and how to eat mindfully, what that means for you as an individual, and how to apply what you've learned in this final step of how to eat more and lose weight. So I hope you've enjoyed those previous episodes. I'm guessing you have, because you're here with me on part 3. Now, mindful eating, right? Mindful is a really buzzword at the moment. Everything seems to be about being mindful, and it is a very important thing to consider. And being mindful, the way that I perceive what it means, it's a way of connecting your mind with your body and the actions that you take. I know maybe you have experienced in the past, I know I certainly have, where sometimes you might eat something and you don't actually remember eating it, or even whether you enjoyed it, because you haven't done it in a mindful state. And I liken it to, have you ever got in your car, driven somewhere, got to the destination and thought to yourself, I don't actually remember the journey. I don't actually remember driving here. And eating in a way that isn't mindful is very similar to that journey that you drove and you don't remember because your mind has been elsewhere. Now, when it comes to eating and losing weight, being mindful is going to be really, really helpful, because if you're having these out of body experiences, or perhaps you're eating in what is known as a distracted state. So I like to ask questions on my podcast, and I've asked a question in each of the previous episodes. And my question for you today is, do you eat in a distracted state? Now, it might be typically lunchtime. Maybe you're at work, or maybe you've got young kids, or however your life looks, lunch tends to be grabbed, or perhaps it's breakfast where you might be on your own. You're not in a social situation. You're not sat down with your other half or your family, and it might just be you, and you're eating, but you're scrolling on your phone at the same time. Or perhaps you're at your desk and you're still working on your computer, or perhaps you're reading or watching TV. And by eating in a distracted state, it's taking your focus and your attention away from the food that you're eating. And the issue with taking your attention away from the food that you're eating is that it will reduce the enjoyment, the pleasure that you get from that food, as well as the feeling of fullness and satisfaction. And as a result, managing your hunger and not overeating as a result of eating in a distracted state. And I'm going to break that all down. And that's what this episode is all about. because it's all very well and good you making those really positive changes, and hopefully you've used your worksheet and you've identified the areas that perhaps you need to focus more on in your own nutrition. That's great, and it's really positive. But now this is the final piece to the puzzle. And in episode 1, I talked about fitting all the pieces of the puzzle together. And this is your final piece of your puzzle. So let's kind of rewind what I just said. So first of all, mindful eating, the first thing you want to be able to do is increase the pleasure from the food that you're eating. And it might seem very exaggerated, because what's pleasurable necessarily about a breakfast on a Monday morning before a long day at work, or any day for that matter, or any meal for that matter? But if you take away distraction, and for the 10 minutes it takes for you to eat that meal, whatever it might be, the pleasure from that meal will greatly increase. And what you'll find as well is that when you're not distracted, you will chew your food a lot slower. And if you just take a moment to think back to your last meal, perhaps it was in a distracted state, you will tend to eat much quicker. You may not realize it just now, but now that I've said it, you might notice it. If you are going to have a meal and you're scrolling, swiping, doing whatever it is on your phone, you will tend to eat a lot quicker. And when you eat a lot quicker, you're not chewing your food. You're impacting your digestion negatively. And we want to put your digestion in a great place. We don't want any bloating. And if you're eating quickly and taking in additional air, can impact digestion, possibly bloating. So slowing down your chewing and your eating is going to enable you to better digest your food, and also experience in a more positive way the taste, the textures, the flavor, and the deliciousness of the food that you have prepared. And hopefully you are eating food that you enjoy, and that just because you're wanting to lose weight, you're not changing from eating the foods that you like. You may need to make tweaks and adjustments as we've talked in previous episodes, but ideally you're eating food that you enjoy. And it's important that you taste it, chew it, and enjoy it, and eat it in an undistracted state. Now, the other part of mindful eating is setting down your cutlery and just taking a moment to check in with yourself. How are you feeling? Are you reaching a level of fullness, of mild fullness? Where are you in terms of from where you were in terms of hunger when you started your meal to where you are when you set your cutlery down, perhaps partway through that meal? Where are you? Are you feeling satisfied yet? Are you feeling full? If you're not, pick up your cutlery and continue eating in an undistracted, mindful state. And you can repeat that process again. Now, if your goal is to lose body fat, lose weight, you don't want to be overly consuming at each of your meals. So yes, you want to have filling and high volume nutritious meals in a way that I described in part 2, but you don't want to eat past fullness, because then you're eating a higher amount of food, i.e. more calories than perhaps you need when it comes to losing body fat. So a really easy, simple indicator is to eat to approximately 80% full. Now, you may have to learn what that feels like. And you may be so used to not thinking about that maybe if you spend some time thinking about it or noticing it on the meals you have following on from this podcast, you may realize that actually you're eating to 100% fullness at every meal. And this could be a reason why you're not losing body fat. Or perhaps you've reduced your meals so much because you're trying to lose weight that you've actually leaving so much hunger at the end of a meal, it could be the reason why you're potentially reaching for snacks later on in the day, typically, usually in the evening when you're less busy and you're less distracted. So using that 80%, 75 to 80% fullness as an indicator is going to be really helpful. So when you set your cutlery down and you check in with yourself, ask yourself, where am I? It's 80% is a mild fullness. So you're not starving hungry. It's a mild fullness. Could you eat some more? Yeah, absolutely. But you're going to choose not to because you're at a mild fullness, and leaving that 20% little bit of hunger at the end of a meal is representing you being in a calorie deficit. And therefore, you're going to enable you to progress towards your goal, but not leaving yourself in a too hungry state that you're reaching for snacks. And learning where that 80% may take a bit of time and a bit of tuning in, but hey, time's going to pass anyway, so you may as well do it, working towards your goal and raising your awareness to these things. When you slow down your eating and you chew more slowly, you gain more pleasure from your food, you set your cutlery down and you check in with yourself, you ask yourself your levels of fullness, where you are in terms of satiety, and you're reaching that 80%. By you going through that process, you're going to reduce the likelihood of eating too quickly. You're absolutely going to reduce the likelihood of eating too quickly. And as a result, you're not going to go back for more because you haven't reached levels of satiety. Now, when you eat too quickly, your hormones, your hunger hormones that signal, your hunger hormone that signals that you are full, it's delayed. It can't keep up with you if you're eating too quickly. And so you may still think you're hungry. So you go back for a bit more. And then have you ever had that feeling where you all of a sudden go back for a bit more? You felt fine when you did it. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, my jeans are tight. I need to undo my button. I'm past fullness. And that's because you probably eaten too quickly, not given your hormones time to signal that you're full, and then you've gone back for more. And by the time your hormone has caught up with you, you've gone past fullness. So that's another good reason to slow down your eating. It's still not going to take you all day. Your breakfast will still take around 10 minutes, right? Whatever it is. But it's slowing it down, and it's going to help you reach that 80% of fullness. And this is what mindful eating is. Now, can you eat mindfully in a social situation when you're with your family in the evening, or a meal out, or with friends? Can you eat mindfully in a social situation? Yes, you can. Absolutely. You can still eat mindfully in a social situation. And actually, you're probably eating slower anyway in a social situation because you're talking to whoever you're with, you're sharing your day, you're chatting. And especially if you're having a meal out, you want to enjoy the environment and the company of whoever you're with. And so you will tend to eat slower anyway. But eating mindfully when you're on a meal out, you can still set your cutlery down. You can still eat and chew your food much slower. When it comes to the taste and textures of your food, if you haven't cooked it, the appreciation, the gratitude, and the taste may even increase because you haven't got to make it and you haven't got to clear it up. So really tune into that. And when your cutlery is set down, you can do that mental check-in where you are in terms of fullness. And you can also use that opportunity to talk so that you're not talking whilst you're eating, because then you're not noticing what you're eating, apart from the table manners as well. So you want to be setting down your cutlery when you're talking. And then you can obviously continue eating when you're listening, or when just there's no conversation and you might just carry on with your food. Now, if you are adopting the steps of the mindful eating that I've just shared with you, no matter whether you're on your own or you're in a social situation or eating with your family or with your partner or with a friend, the other part of mindful eating is when you reach that 80% fullness, but yet you look down to your plate and there may still be food on your plate. What's the initial thought that goes through your mind? Do you just think, oh, well, I'll just finish what's on my plate? Because that's how I was brought up as a kid. My parents always told me to finish the food on my plate. And, there are people not so fortunate as me that has this food, so I need to clear my plate. I wouldn't blame you for thinking like that because it becomes instilled in us from children. But now you're an adult. And if you've reached the point of 80% fullness, if your goal is fat loss, obviously, if your goal's not fat loss, you can eat to 100%. You might be at maintenance. You can eat 100%. But if your goal is fat loss and you want to lose weight, then you're going to need to leave a little bit of hunger and you're going to eat to around 80%. If you've still got food on your plate, what is your mindset around that? What do you usually do? How do you normally deal with that? Do you eat it anyway to not be wasteful? Or do you give yourself permission to leave that food, no matter if it's wasteful, no matter if you're offending whoever made you that meal? Perhaps it's your mother-in-law. Perhaps you don't want to offend the waiter. Perhaps you just don't want to be rude. Perhaps you've made it and you just don't want to throw it away. Or perhaps, I don't know, what other reasons you might have for leaving that food. But you're an adult now and you have a goal and it matters to you and you want to lose weight. It's going to improve your health. It's going to make you feel good. Can you give yourself permission to leave the remainder of the food on your plate? Perhaps someone else at the table wants to have it. Perhaps you can box it up, have it as a leftover. Perhaps you just accept that it's going to go to waste, but forcing it into you, that's wasteful and it's not in line with the goal that you have. So giving yourself permission to leave food on your plate is going to be a really positive thing when it comes to working towards your goal, no matter what the food type is, who cooked it, where you're eating it. It would be a really, really mindful thing. Now, along with the mindful eating and giving yourself permission to leave food on your plate, you also want to be mindful of how hungry you get before you eat, because if your hunger levels drop too low and you are ravenous, it's going to make it really difficult to eat mindfully because you're so hungry and you just want to get it in. And what happens is that you've almost let it go too far before eating, and that's when nothing hits the sides, hits like it's going into an empty stomach and nothing quite fills you up. So try to eat every 3 to 4 hours, i.e. whatever, your breakfast, lunch, dinner. No matter what time you have breakfast, you want to be having that regular meal timing. Some people may delay their breakfast, some people may have breakfast early. Whatever time it is, you still want to have regular meals, because if your hunger drops too low, you skip a meal because you're busy at work and you're not thinking about food, and you don't actually notice how hungry you are because you've got a project to finish or a job to do, and you skip it, it will catch up with you. And when it catches up with you, chances are it's going to be very hard to eat mindfully, and nothing is going to help you reach that level of satiety. And your 80% is going to be really skewed. You're not actually going to know where it is. So if you want to manage the amount of food that you're eating, I would recommend that you eat at regular intervals and that you have regular meals, because it will help you manage your hunger and regulate your appetite and reduce your likelihood of snacking later in the evening. Now, over these 3 episodes of this 3-part mini series, How to Eat More and Lose Weight, I am hoping that you have gained the tools to be able to make small tweaks and changes to the diet that you currently have. Remember, you're going to need to be consistent with them. It's not going to happen just from doing it for a day, 3 days, 4 days, a week. It needs to happen consistently. You may not get it done perfectly, but it's not about being perfect. It's about being imperfect but consistent, and you are the result of what you do most of the time. So remember that going forwards in whatever you do, whether it's exercise, whether it's your nutrition, whether it's creating those high volume meals, whether it's including the protein at every meal, adding the veg, and adopting all these little tweaks and changes. Aim to do it consistently, even if it's not perfectly. I never ask my clients to be perfect. I actually actively steer them away from being perfect, because the issue with being perfect is that if you can't be perfect, then you tend to think that you failed, and then you quit, and then you really don't do any of the actions that you had intended. So I would rather you do the best you can in the situation that you're in. There is a worksheet that goes along with this episode, part 3 of the mini series. So go and do it. It will help you get in the mindset of eating mindfully and being aware of that. If you have enjoyed this 3-part mini series, I would be so grateful for you if you could share my podcast, on your social media, in your WhatsApp groups, on your Facebook pages, in your messenger groups, however you communicate. I would be really grateful, because I want to help as many women as I can. Not everyone is fortunate enough to be able to have coaching. And if I can make a difference and help just one other person, it would mean the absolute world to me. And the way that I'm going to do that is by you sharing me with your friends, whether that be my podcast or my social media. Now, if you've listened to this mini series and you think, you know what, I quite like Debra. I like what she's saying. I like her message. I like her style. And you think you would benefit from coaching, then reach out and get in touch with me. Send me a message. All my contact details are in the show notes. I don't mind which way you contact me. You might just have a question. You might want to just find out about coaching. Whatever it is, please reach out. I would love to help. And I love to hear from you guys. So please share me and contact me for questions and to find out more about how my coaching can help you. I hope you've enjoyed this 3-part mini series, and I look forward to catching up on the next podcast episode. Thank you for joining me.